First up, we've got Brian Lee Crowley, who has a new book out. Brian is the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and his book is called Gardeners versus Designers. So, Brian, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Colin.
So, Brian, why don't we start off with the big picture here? You've got a book on public policy, and what you've, I think, done is essentially put people into one of two camps. You're either a gardener or a designer. Could you tell us about those camps and a bit more about your book?
Sure, absolutely, Colin. So, look, the book arises from an experience I've had. Maybe a number of people watching this have had a similar experience where I keep hearing our political leaders tell us what a terrible place Canada is. That it's genocidal, it's full of racists and, hate, and it needs to be redesigned from the bottom up. It's kind of beyond saving. It's a poor excuse for a country. And I listen to this talk and I think that doesn't correspond at all to the Canada that I know, or the Canada that I experience with my friends, or that I hear talked about when I talk to immigrants who've moved here when they have choices of any other country in the world. And it became clear to me that what's going on is there is a campaign to undermine our faith and our affection and our respect for the institutions that have made Canada such a great society. And I thought it was time to push back a little bit against this. And of course, in the book, when I talk about gardeners and designers, I'm talking exactly about those people who on the one hand say, oh, Canada's a terrible place and needs to be fixed and we're going to redesign it from the bottom up. Those are the designers. Those are the people who think they're smarter than the generations of Canadians who through their own efforts have created all the things that make Canada great. Whereas gardeners are the people who say, well, no, actually, people in government are actually just not smarter than the rest of us. There's no reason for us to think that if they tried to redesign Canada from the bottom up, that they would make it better than it already is. And all these things that make Canada great, all these institutions, whether we're talking about private property, the rule of law, independent courts, democracy, all of these terrific institutions that have made Canada such a wonderful, desirable society that draws people from all over the world. These are things that are the result of generations of experience. And the role of government is not to replace them with some design thing that people in government think is better. It's to cultivate, it's to be that gardener that doesn't think he's in charge of the garden, but understands that a gardener can contribute to the flourishing of the garden by doing a few key things that help the plants in the garden realize their best growth and flourishing. And that's what I was trying to get at in the book.
So Brian, haven't we always had this problem though, where progressives for a long time now, they've taken this designer approach where they want to try and control things centrally from the top down, versus the gardeners, the freedom-oriented people that believe that the grassroots should have more freedom, less government, and that they should be able to solve their own problems. Is that always been the case? Has it gotten worse? What's your take on that?
Yeah, of course, there's always been people who thought, hey, I can make things much better. I'm so much smarter than everything that has gone before and all the people that have gone before. So that's not new. But I would say that what is new is this idea that Canada is a comprehensively failed society. That, there is nothing redeemable about Canada. And so we now have to move the designers thing, the progressives thing, we now have to move on a broad front to redesign every institution of Canadian society. I don't often quote Jean Chrétien, but, I think back to Jean Chrétien when he was prime minister, and he used to give these, speeches about, I love Canada and Canada's the greatest country in the world. And he wasn't out to try and redesign Canadian society. On the contrary, he thought that Canada was a pretty great place. And so, part of what I'm saying is this is not the property of any individual political party. It so happens that the Progressives have, for the moment, seized control of the Liberal Party, and they are using it as an instrument to redesign Canadian society, whether it's, pharmacare or, national daycare or universal basic income or any one of these institutions. These are all attempts to toss out what generations of experience of Canadians have shown works for us in exchange for it. These fancy theoretical models that, appeal to people who have PhDs from big universities and have worked at international consultancies and maybe been in the UN or the Bank of England, for God's sake. I think that it's important that the people who understand what it is that makes Canada great stand up and defend it. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was I was trying to give people some insight into a new language. The people who defend Canada, we often want to talk about markets. And I got to tell you, my experience is the average person just doesn't care about markets. You say, I'm here to defend markets. They say, oh, they're bored and they're not interested. We need to find imagery and ideas that capture the imagination. And that's part of what I was after with this image of gardening. And I have to tell you that I've been quite surprised and pleased at the extent to which people say, wow, I really resonate to this idea of gardening, because that's something I do. It's something in my life. I understand what you're saying when you say that gardeners don't control everything in the garden. They make a big contribution. You can't do without gardeners. But what they do is infinitely more subtle and quiet and thoughtful than the people with the big plans to redesign Canadian society based on really a complete pretense of knowledge. The people who say, we know how to get women into the workforce, for example, by having a universal daycare system. They never ask women, do you want to be in the workforce? Would you like to be able to stay at home and look after your kids? We want you to have the choices that you want, rather than having a one-size-fits-all program assuming that we know what women want. Just as an example. Same with many of the other programs that I've mentioned. Governments simply don't know enough about what we want, and they're always trying to impose their priorities on the rest of us. And I think it's very important that gardeners understand what the alternative is to that and be able to defend it in a way that resonates with Canadians. And that's what the book's about.
So you've talked about progressive designers having this very negative view of our country rather than a positive one. Throwing out terms like, the Canada's systemically racist, or that everyone's homophobic, or that, people are full of hate, all these negative terms. But I wonder if it's sort of permeated beyond that, sort of this negative approach to our country rather than positive. And as an example, you mentioned Jean Chrétien, but I think even if we went back, say, 10 years ago, and we looked at, say, the leaders of the two main national mainstream political parties in Canada, the Conservatives and the Liberals, I think they would have a much more positive attitude and have more positive things to say about our country than, say, right now, where you've got the Prime Minister who has said that our country is systemically racist, and you've got Erin O'Toole who won't say that we're not systemically racist. So how did we get to this point where it goes beyond sort of the progressive sort of radical fringe to mainstream politicians being timid about this?
Yeah, well, you see, again, back to what I was saying about why I wrote the book, I found that the people who are in their hearts gardeners have often forgotten how to explain why gardening is the right approach to a society. It says that there is nobody at the top who has an overarching vision of society that politics should be used to impose on the rest of us. That instead, a healthy society grows from the bottom up, and people, the The people in government are there to balance all of the pieces of society, not to say you're a winner and you're a loser. We're going to have green economy. We're not going to have oil and gas. This is a complete, I think, distortion of the role of government. And I got very concerned that I saw that the people who are, as I say, in their hearts gardeners, were a bit intimidated by all of this nasty, progressive, we're a horrible, homophobic, racist, genocidal, et cetera, society. And they didn't know how to respond. And I was trying to lay out what the history is of the thinking behind the kind of philosophy of government that I'm talking about. And, I don't talk about Friedrich Hayek and Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and all the other, members of the Scottish Enlightenment, David Hume and so on. I don't talk about them by name. Really, this book is a reminder to the people who govern our society that there is a way of thinking about our society which repudiates progressivism and which defends the Canada that we have come to love so well.
So one of the things that I like about your thesis, Brian, is that you talk about how Canada is a great country, that people literally come to our country from all over the world. They decide to make Canada home. But you also acknowledge that we do still have shortcomings as a nation. We have things where we could improve. We're not perfect. What would you sort of see as some of those shortcomings, and what do you think needs to be done in terms of how we can improve?
Well, I mean, look, gardening as a philosophy of government, if I can put it that way, is only going to be credible if we say, look, we accept that sometimes, there are members of our society who, for whatever reason, are not able to generate enough income to live a decent life. Their standard of life shocks the conscience of the community. We need to have a philosophy of how government can make the lives of Canadians better by setting minimum standards, ensuring that no one falls below them. There are lots of things for government to do. This is not a philosophy of laissez-faire, everything in Canada is perfect. On the contrary, there are lots of reasons for us to think quite carefully about how government can be used to improve the lives of Canadians. And I would venture to say that, things like unemployment insurance, for example, have made the lives of Canadians better. That we wouldn't be a good society if we didn't have a well-developed social welfare system that made sure that people who can't generate enough income for themselves through their efforts in the marketplace are looked after by the rest of us. So there's always a debate to be had about how do we do that properly. It's not improper to say, hey, maybe we should have a universal basic income. I think that if you think about it carefully, you'll realize that that's not the right way to do it. But these are the correct kind of debates to have in society. I just find that the designers are making all the running these days because they've got the arguments that resonate with people. We have to find the arguments that also resonate with people, that allow us to push back in a way that makes it clear that we are compassionate, that we care about the people that our institutions don't always serve well, and that we're always looking for ways to make sure that they are not left behind, but that we don't have to crush down the incentives and the rewards and the entrepreneurialism and the energy of everybody else in order to make that happen. And I think that's a view of the role of government that is not being properly articulated today.
So Brian, as a final question here, what do you think that viewers who are watching this, people who are everyday Canadians from all walks of life, what do you think they need to do to help advance some of these better ideas that you just talked about? What would be some action items that they could do? We've got 1 minute for that one, sorry.
No problem. Well, they could buy the book. They could learn about the difference between these two philosophies of government, because I think there are a lot of people who in their heart, in their mind, they feel something is not right, but they can't articulate it. It's terribly important. Ideas matter. if we get the right ideas in people's minds, if they can understand why the progressive vision doesn't work and that there is an alternative, then we can have a far more fruitful conversation amongst ourselves as Canadians about the role of government and how we make this society better than it is. And it's already pretty damn good.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much, Brian. And if people want to get a copy of your book, where can they get it?
Well, it's available at both Amazon and Indigo, and I think in a lot of bookshops now. It takes a little while to get them out as physical objects, but you know, it's been in the top 10 politics and government sellers on Amazon now for a number of weeks, and I would be delighted if people do get the book, if they come back and give me their feedback. I've had some terrific thoughts expressed to me by people who've read the book, and it's already making me think about the next one to come.
All right. Well, listen, thanks a lot for your time today.